Usually when we look at a map of the world, there is this expectation of absolute objective reality.
Yeah, totally. It feels like engineering or, basic math.
Right. You look at a globe, you see a jagged coastline, and you assume the cartographer is just pointing and saying, hey, there it is. That is the physical boundary of the land.
Because it is presented to us as a strict binary, pure physical geography. It is either water or it is land.
Water or land. It is clean. There is no ambiguity.
And honestly, that is deeply comforting. I mean, we like things to be visible. We like them to be categorized. We trust the map maker implicitly because we assume they're just passively recording what nature has already built.
Exactly. But, well, what if the lines drawn on the map were not just describing a place, but actually inventing it to control it?
That is a massive paradigm shift.
It really is. So today, we are dismantling the map. Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at Edward Said's groundbreaking 1978 concept, Orientalism.
And this is a huge one.
Oh, absolutely. We have a stack of sources here. We are looking at excerpts from his original highly influential book, right alongside a critical review of his work.
We will be exploring exactly how the West constructed its idea of, quote, the East.
But really quickly, before we dive into the architecture of this idea, we need to be incredibly clear about our role today.
Yes, that is vital. The source material we are examining discusses some highly politically charged themes.
Very charged.
We are dealing with texts that touch on European imperialism, the historical and modern Middle East, and even frameworks touching on Marxism.
So, to be incredibly clear to you listening, our goal today is not to take a political side or endorse Said's worldview in any way.
Not at all. We are acting strictly as neutral observers here.
Right. We were just impartially reporting the ideas contained in these original texts so you can thoroughly understand Said's framework. We are essentially here to read the blueprints of a very specific, very influential intellectual architecture.
I like that, reading the blueprints.
Yeah. So our mission today is to unpack the three main definitions of Orientalism that Said outlines. We will trace its roots all the way back to the late 18th century.
And reveal how it operated. Not just as a genre of art or an isolated field of study, but as a massive world-spanning system of Western institutional power.
A literal system of power. We are going to explore how cultural hegemony creates power through consent rather than just brute force.
Which is fascinating.
It is. And we will see how even supposedly objective academic disciplines historically reinforce colonial domination.
There is a lot of ground to cover.
There is. So before we can understand how Orientalism ruled empires and shaped global policy, we have to understand what it actually is.
Right. We need the foundation.
Exactly. And this is where I find myself a bit tangled up in the sources, to be honest. How can a single word represent so many different things?
It is a fair question.
Because Said seems to be using the word Orientalism to describe, like, a university department, a classical poem, and a colonial government all at the exact same time.
Yeah, he does. It functions as a massive umbrella term for him. And that is exactly why Said breaks it down into a three-pronged definition.
Okay, so a three-part system.
Yes. Let's look at the first pillar. The most readily accepted designation for Orientalism is academic.
Like the people who literally call themselves Orientalists.
Precisely. This is Orientalism as a formal discipline. It is practiced by anthropologists, sociologists, historians, and philologists.
Wait, philologists? Those are the people who study the historical development of languages, right?
Exactly. Anyone who teaches, writes about, or researches the Orient is engaging in this academic form of Orientalism.
Okay, that makes sense.
It is the institutionalized production of knowledge about the East. Think of the university lecture hall, the peer-reviewed journal, the museum curation.
Okay, let's unpack this. That covers the university side. That is the academic pillar. But then Said goes much wider for his second definition.
He does. He zooms way out.
He described an imaginative or philosophical Orientalism. He says this is a style of thought based on a binary distinction.
Right, an ontological and epistemological distinction, to use his exact terms.
Okay, wait, let's pause on those heavy words for a second.
Yeah.
Ontological, meaning how we define what the East actually is as an entity, right?
The nature of its being.
And epistemological, meaning the rules for what counts as true knowledge about it. Do I have that correct?
You have it perfectly. And this binary between the Orient, meaning the East, and the Occident, meaning the West, it is not just restricted to scholars hiding in libraries.
No, it goes way beyond that.
It structures an enormous range of writing. We are talking about classical poets like Aeschylus and Dante.
Now, all the way back to Dante.
All the way to Victor Hugo and Karl Marx in the 19th century.
So across huge sweeps of time.
Yeah, and all of these writers, regardless of their wildly different politics, their different eras, or their personal philosophies, they all accepted this basic binary of East and West.
It was just a given for them.
Exactly. It was the absolute starting point for their theories, their novels, and their political accounts.
It is kind of like they all agreed on the stage setting before they even started writing the play.
That is a great way to put it.
Like, the East is over there. It is mysterious. It operates by fundamentally different rules. And the West is here. And it is the baseline for what is considered normal humanity.
Which brings us to the third, and honestly, perhaps the most historically specific and materially impactful meaning.
Yeah.
The institutional or corporate definition.
Corporate Orientalism. That sounds ominous.
It is Orientalism as the historical mechanism for dealing with the Orient.
Dealing with it by, well, making statements about it, authorizing views of it, describing it, teaching it.
Settling it.
Right, settling it and eventually ruling over it.
This is where Said argues that Orientalism is a Western style for dominating, restructuring, and having authority over the Orient.
Okay, so it goes from the classroom to the poem to the government.
Yes. What is absolutely crucial to grasp here is that these three definitions are not separate silos. They do not operate independently.
You feed into each other.
They are completely interdependent. So academic Orientalism produces the vocabulary and the conceptual frameworks, right?
Right. And then imaginative Orientalism takes that academic vocabulary and spreads it. It puts it into literature, art, and popular culture.
Exactly. It mainstreams the academic ideas.
It turns it into something the general public just casually consumes as entertainment or general knowledge.
And then the final step, institutional Orientalism deploys those mainstreamed ideas in the direct service of colonial governance.
It weaponizes it.
Basically, yes. Together, they create what Said calls a created body of theory and practice, a system in which there has been a considerable material investment over many, many generations.
Okay, I buy that books and paintings change minds. Obviously, art matters. But Said is claiming this literally built empires. I had to push back a little bit here.
Go ahead.
Isn't that giving way too much credit to a bunch of poets and linguists?
Yeah.
I mean, if Orientalism is just a distortion, like a series of myths or lies about the East, why didn't actual contact with the East just shatter the illusion?
It is a really logical question.
Right. You would think that once European administrators and scholars actually traveled to these places, met the local people, and lived in the actual culture, the fantasy would just evaporate in the face of raw daily truth.
What's fascinating here is that Said argues Orientalism is not merely a collection of errors. It is not just fantasies that can be blown away by the truth.
So it is not a fragile illusion?
Not at all. It was a concrete system. And to explain this, Said explicitly invokes the French philosopher Michel Foucault's concept of discourse.
Discourse. That is one of those heavy words that gets thrown around a lot in academia, usually just to make simple things sound incredibly complicated.
It can definitely be used that way, yeah.
So how does it actually work in this specific context? What is a discourse here?
Think of a discourse as a closed system of language and rules. It strictly dictates what can and cannot be said about a topic.
So it sets the boundaries.
Exactly. Without understanding Orientalism as a discourse, Said argues we cannot grasp how European culture was able to manage and even produce the Orient.
Produce it.
Yes, politically, sociologically, militarily, and imaginatively. A discourse is not just a bunch of words describing a pre-existing reality. It actually creates the reality it describes by limiting the boundaries of thought.
Okay, let me try an analogy. So it is not like a funhouse mirror that just distorts a real object you are looking at.
Okay.
It is more like the algorithm on your social media feed.
Oh, that is very modern. I like that.
Right, because the algorithm does not just change the color of the picture you are looking at. It literally dictates what information is allowed to show up on your screen in the very first place.
Yes, exactly.
Until you eventually just forget that other information even exists outside of that curated feed. The feed becomes your entire reality.
That is a highly effective way to conceptualize it. It is a filter you do not even know you are wearing, and it is an algorithm with massive institutional backing.
Right. It has armies and banks behind it.
The discourse of Orientalism was so authoritative that no one writing, thinking, or acting on the Orient could do so without taking account of the limitations imposed by it.
Said calls it a regime of truth, right?
Yes, a regime of truth. If an administrator went to the East and saw something that completely contradicted the Orientalist archive, the discourse provided a prepackaged way to explain it away.
Or they would just simply ignore it.
Precisely, because the system of Orientalism was simply stronger than individual empirical observation. Your own eyes didn't matter as much as the text.
Wow. Okay, so if Orientalism is this massive, self-sustaining discourse that literally dictates what people can see and think, when did it actually start?
The origins.
Yeah, when did it shift from being just vague myths about the East to a formalized, powerful system? The sources say we have to move historically to the late 18th century, but how did that shift actually happen?
Well, there were early institutional moments, of course. The sources mention the Council of Vienne in 1311.
That is way back.
It is. That council established chairs in Arabic, Greek, Hebrew, and Syriac at major European universities. But that early stuff was still largely tied to religious frameworks.
Like Christianity defining itself defensively against Islam and Judaism.
Exactly. It was theological. The late 18th century, however, marks the true starting point of modern Orientalism.
There's a massive shift here. Before, the East was treated almost like a biblical backdrop.
A place of religious antiquity, a place for pilgrims to go.
Right. But in the late 1700s, it starts being treated as a scientific and geographical reality, a place to be measured, weighed, and categorized.
Yes, the scientific method arrives in the Orient.
And the text points to a very specific, explosive event as the launch pad for this. Napoleon's 1798 invasion of Egypt.
Napoleon's invasion is critical. We really have to understand the sheer scale of what he did. It was not just a military campaign.
It was huge.
It was, as the text describes it, a truly scientific appropriation of one culture by another.
Scientific appropriation.
Yes. Napoleon didn't just bring soldiers and cannons. He brought a literal army of scholars, scientists, and researchers.
He brought an entire institute with him, the Institut d'Egypte.
They came prepared.
They really did. I read they even brought printing presses with Arabic type right into the campaign.
They did. And they produced this massive multi-volume work called the Description de l'Égypte.
And we are not talking about a trouser brochure here. They turned an entire country into a laboratory for Western knowledge.
That is exactly what it was, a laboratory.
They measured the monuments, they cataloged the flora and fauna, they mapped the irrigation systems. They essentially wrote the definitive scientific text on Egypt entirely for a European audience.
And in doing so, they provided a scene or a setting for modern Orientalism. Egypt, and subsequently other Islamic lands, became a theater of effective Western knowledge.
It was no longer a mystery. It was data.
Yes. Following Napoleon, the language of Orientalism changed radically. It became upgraded into a means of creation. The Orient was reconstructed, reassembled, and crafted by Orientalists in these massive encyclopedic volumes.
The text also mentions other scholars who were part of this late 18th century consolidation, like William Jones.
Ah, yes, William Jones. He opened up Sanskrit to European scholarship.
And Enkidu Duperon, who did the same for Avestan.
Right. And it is important to note, these were not just guys reading books in a vacuum. They were creating entirely new academic disciplines.
Yeah. And Jones didn't just study Sanskrit for fun. He went to India as a jurist, right? A judge for the British East India Company.
Exactly. The scholarship and the colonial administration were happening literally in the exact same moment.
Often by the exact same people.
Which leads to a profound psychological and intellectual dynamic that the sources highlight. There is a deeply telling anecdote in the text about early 19th century German Orientalists.
Oh, I love this story.
It is very revealing. According to the story, these scholars had studied India extensively through texts. They were considered the foremost experts in the entire world on Indian languages and philosophy.
But they had never actually been there.
Right. But upon their first encounter with a living 8-armed Indian statue, they were, quote, cured completely of their Orientalist taste.
Let's slow down and really look at the mechanism of that reaction, because it is wild. They loved the idea of India so much they dedicated their entire professional lives to it.
Yes.
But when they saw an actual physical artifact, something created by the living culture, they were repulsed. I mean, why?
Because the living Orient disrupted the neatly categorized textual Orient they had constructed in their minds and in their universities.
It didn't fit the algorithm.
Exactly. Their expertise was based on dead languages and perfectly controlled manuscripts. A living, complex, physical expression of that culture defied their strict categories.
It was messy.
It was messy, and it was alien in a way their books were not. They preferred their textualized Orient over the living reality. They wanted the Orient they had made, not the one that actually existed out in the world.
That is the ultimate irony. The discovery of the East by these modern sciences actually meant closing the East down into categorized, manageable little boxes.
It was about control, not connection.
It wasn't about understanding the East on its own terms at all. It was about defining it on Western terms so it could be filed away in a cabinet marked the Orient.
This brings us right to the threshold of a critical debate. Knowing that the 18th century birthed this scientific categorized approach, we have to ask a huge question.
Okay, what is it?
Did these scholars know they were building an intellectual empire, or did they genuinely think they were just doing objective, disinterested research?
Oh, that is the million-dollar question. And Said goes right for the throat on this one, doesn't he?
He absolutely does.
He argues that the distinction between pure non-political knowledge and political knowledge is just a myth.
Yeah.
Specifically, he calls it a liberal consensus myth.
Yes.
And just to be clear for the listener, when Said targets the liberal consensus here, he isn't talking about modern progressive politics.
No, not at all.
He's talking about that classic Enlightenment-era ideal, the idea that a scientist in a lab coat or a scholar in a dusty library can be perfectly neutral, totally detached from the politics of their day.
It is very easy to argue that a humanist studying the poetry of William Wordsworth is not engaged in politics, right?
Yeah.
Whereas someone studying Soviet economics clearly is.
Right. That is the standard assumption.
The liberal consensus relies on the idea that true scholarship is impartial and above partisan belief. But Said argues that no one has ever devised a method for detaching a scholar from their circumstances.
You cannot separate the art from the artist's passport.
Exactly. You cannot detach them from their class, their beliefs, their social position, or the simple fact of their involvement with a specific global power.
You just can't float above the earth like a brain in a jar.
Mm-hmm.
If you were an Englishman living in India in the late 19th century, your interest in India is never going to be completely divorced from the fact that India is a British colony.
It is a context for everything.
It is the air you are breathing. Said is essentially saying that pretending the gravity of imperialism does not affect the dance of scholarship is just being deeply disingenuous.
And the academic research disciplines historically reinforced these colonial views. They did it very effectively, often under the guise of objective science.
What kind of science?
The text mentions comparative linguistics, anatomy, and philology under figures like Sylvestre de Saussy and Ernest Renan. These disciplines historically divided humanity into manageable types.
Okay, wait. Why does categorizing languages matter so much? How does a grammar textbook help you govern a colony? I don't see the jump there.
Because Renan, for example, used comparative grammar and anatomy to lend his Orientalism scientific prestige.
Oh, I see.
By categorizing languages hierarchically, like saying the Semitic languages were fundamentally less developed than the Indo-European languages, he was implicitly arguing something much darker.
He was arguing that the people speaking those languages were less developed.
Exactly. The text notes that by dividing people into these rigid types, it basically denied Oriental culture the right to be generated normally. It made culture seem like an artificial construct that could only be understood in a European philological laboratory.
Oh, wow. So instead of the old medieval binary of Christian versus heathen, which was purely religious,
it becomes rational versus backward, or developed versus arrested.
The underlying dynamic of superiority and inferiority remains exactly the same.
Yes.
It's just that the justification has shifted. It moved from theology to biology, linguistics, and anthropology. The Orient was still being accommodated to Western structures, just secular scientific ones.
And Said is very open about how his own identity forced him to see this dynamic. He views the influence of his own identity on his scholarship as completely central to his methodology.
He doesn't pretend to be the brain in the jar.
Not for a second. He notes that his contemporary reality as an Arab Palestinian living in the West, acting as a humanist in the American Academy, forced him to confront this.
It forced him to confront the challenge of linking culture to imperialism in a way that someone completely embedded in the dominant culture might just easily overlook.
He argues that a scholar studying the Orient comes to it as a European or an American first, and as an individual second.
Meaning their passport precedes their personality.
Right. This doesn't mean the individual doesn't matter. Of course they do. But it implies a structural awareness, however dim, of belonging to a power with definite interests in the Orient.
Because this objective knowledge was generated out of strength, it essentially created the Orient.
It manufactured the subject.
Right. As the text notes, in the language of colonial administrators, the Oriental is depicted as something one judges in a court of law, studies in a curriculum, disciplines in a prison, or illustrates in a zoological manual.
The Oriental is always contained, always bounded by dominating frameworks.
Which brings us to the next massive piece of the puzzle. We have established that academia provided the facts, right? The zoological manuals, the grammar textbooks.
The raw material of the discourse.
But how do these facts translate into power over literally millions of people? Here is where it gets really interesting for me.
It is the operational side of the theory.
Because you can't just throw a dictionary at someone and expect them to hand over their country. How did the West manage this vast control without relying solely on the military? I mean, you can't keep a soldier on every single street corner forever. It's too expensive.
You can't. And the answer lies in how societies manufacture consent. And here, Said relies heavily on the Italian Marxist theorist Antonio Gramsci.
Okay, Gramsci.
Specifically, his concept of cultural hegemony.
Let's unpack cultural hegemony, because I know it sounds intimidating. It sounds like a grad school buzzword.
Yeah.
But the text makes the mechanics of it brilliantly clear.
Gramsci differentiates between two main types of control in any society.
First, you have political society.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
This is direct domination. The police, the army, the central bureaucracy. It is inherently coercive. Do what I say, or I will physically put you in jail. Or worse.
But then you have the second type, which is civil society. This is where hegemony operates.
Exactly. Civil society consists of voluntary affiliations. Things like schools, families, unions, and crucially for our topic, literature and culture.
So in civil society, influence works not through direct physical domination, but by consent.
It creates a common sense.
The common sense. I like that.
Cultural hegemony is the result of certain cultural forms and ideas predominating over others, creating a manufactured common sense that circulates literally everywhere.
So for Orientalism, hegemony meant creating a common sense about the Orient.
Yes, a common sense that it is backward, sensual, irrational, and in desperate need of management. And this idea circulated across high culture, popular culture, and administrative practice.
It made European superiority seem like a natural, unquestionable fact of nature rather than a calculated political strategy.
That is the genius of hegemony. It hides the politics behind common sense.
And the text provides a micro-interaction that perfectly illustrates this macro pattern of cultural hegemony. It is about the famous French novelist Gustave Flaubert.
Ah, Flaubert and Kuchuk-Hanem.
Yes, his encounter with an Egyptian courtesan named Kuchuk-Hanem. Let's really dive into this because it is a masterclass in how representation literally equals power.
Flaubert's written encounter with Kuchuk-Hanem became a widely influential model of the, quote, Oriental woman in Western literature. But the power dynamic of the actual interaction is what really matters here.
Right, because, hang on, looking closely at the text, she's not actually speaking at all, is she?
She doesn't say a word in his account.
Flaubert is essentially doing her PR for the rest of the world, and she has absolutely no say in it.
She has no voice in the text whatsoever.
Yeah.
Flaubert spoke for her. He represented her to his readers as typically Oriental.
He detailed her sensuality, her perceived mysteriousness, her silence.
But she never represented her own emotions, her own presence, or her own complex history.
But why was he able to do that? I mean, it's not just because he happened to be a good writer.
No, it was structural.
Right. It was because he was foreign, comparatively wealthy, and male. These were historical facts of domination that allowed him not only to possess her physically in that moment, but to speak for her globally for centuries afterward.
As Said points out, Flaubert's situation of strength in relation to Kuchuk-Hanem fairly stands for the entire pattern of relative strength between East and West.
It is the perfect metaphor.
It really is. It embodies the discourse about the Orient that this power dynamic enabled. He had the pen, he had the audience in Paris, and he had the backing of a hegemonic culture.
A culture that primed his readers to just accept his version of her as the absolute, unquestionable truth about Oriental women.
And the craziest part is that Flaubert probably didn't think of himself as an imperial agent.
Right. He was just an artist writing about his travels. He wasn't working for the French government. He wasn't a spy.
Which perfectly illustrates Said's use of Gramsci. A scholar or an artist doesn't have to be a malicious liar or a paid propagandist to contribute to imperialism.
They can be entirely sincere.
Deeply committed to accuracy and intellectual rigor even, but they operate within a discursive formation, a hegemonic common sense that severely constrains what questions they can even ask, what methods they use, and what conclusions they can reach.
It is the algorithm again. You don't know you are scrolling through a curated feed, so you act freely within its rules. You are liking and sharing what you see.
But the rules of the feed are rigged.
Exactly. They are rigged to support the empire. You feel free, but your output ultimately serves the system.
Orientalism operates through this exact kind of consent. It provides a flexible positional superiority. It puts the Westerner in a whole series of possible relationships with the Orient without ever losing the relative upper hand.
The scientist, the missionary, the trader, the artist.
They could all be in the Orient, or think about it, with very little resistance on the Orient's part.
Okay, but if Flaubert is just writing a novel, how does a fictional story in a Parisian cafe translate to a British soldier pointing a rifle at an Egyptian farmer?
The jump from culture to military.
Yeah. How does culture mutate into actual physical law? We are moving from the textual to the territorial now.
For this, we must look at the unmatched scale of British and French involvement in the Orient. By the end of World War I, Europe had colonized 85% of the Earth.
85%? That is staggering.
It is. And the transition from textual contemplation to administrative and military occupation was deeply, deeply informed by the Orientalist discourse we have been discussing.
The text focuses heavily on two British figures here, Arthur James Balfour and Lord Cromer.
Yes.
Let's look at Lord Cromer, because he is a perfect case study of this transition. He was the British consul general in Egypt from 1883 to 1907.
He was the man on the ground.
Right, running the actual physical machine of empire.
And Cromer's administration of Egypt was explicitly informed by Orientalist assumptions about Arab incapacity for self-rule.
He wasn't just guessing on how to rule them.
No, he had read the scholars, he knew the texts, and his writings reveal the circular logic of Orientalism with unusual candor.
This circular logic is infuriating but fascinating. Let's really break down the mechanics of how Cromer justified his rule.
Let's do it.
Step 1. The Oriental is, by nature, irrational and unable to govern himself.
Step 2. Therefore, the Oriental requires European governance for his own good. It is a burden, a duty of the civilized world.
Step 3. If the Oriental resists this European governance, it merely confirms his irrational and unruly nature.
Step 4, which of course further confirms their desperate need for European governance.
It's a completely closed loop. There is no scenario where the colonized people can prove their capacity for independence.
None at all.
Because the very act of demanding independence is framed as proof of their irrationality. It is like a rigged courtroom where the judge, the jury, the arresting officer, and the law textbook were all written by the prosecutor.
That is an excellent analogy. The Orientalist archive, the centuries of academic and imaginative writing, supplies the administrator, like Cromer, with his assumptions before he ever sets foot in Egypt.
He arrives with the bias installed.
Yes. The administrator's daily experience of dominating the subjects, often encountering resistance, confirms the archive in his mind. The archive is then enriched by the administrator's official testimony back to London.
And so the system seamlessly reproduces itself over and over.
As Cromer envisioned it, the central authority in London processes the human material and knowledge fed into it from the East, converts it into power, and uses it to sustain the empire.
And he genuinely believed this wasn't just a brutal land grab, did he?
No, he thought this was a scientific, rational administration based on empirical facts.
Because he had read the Orientalist scholars.
Precisely. He had the knowledge that justified the power. The knowledge generated out of strength created the Oriental as a subject race.
As the text notes, the Oriental was viewed as if framed by the classroom, the criminal court, the prison, or the illustrated manual.
Orientalism is knowledge that places things Oriental in these disciplinary frameworks for scrutiny, judgment, and governing.
Which brings us back to the sheer durability of this system. It didn't just fade away when the British and French empires crumbled after the mid-20th century.
It adapted.
The text points out that after World War II, the United States took over the mantle of Western hegemony, and with it, the mantle of Orientalism.
The location of global power shifted across the Atlantic, but the underlying discourse remained remarkably intact.
It really did.
The text notes that after the attacks of September 11, 2001, and the subsequent invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, Said's concept of Orientalism enjoyed a massive renaissance.
It suddenly became incredibly relevant again.
Very much so. Readers found in it a framework for understanding the cultural dimensions of the war on terror and the extraordinary range of caricatures of Islam and the Arab world that circulated in Western media and policy circles.
Because the vocabulary was exactly the same. The idea of the Arab mind, the inherent violence, the inability to understand democracy.
These are all 19th century Orientalist tropes.
Originally forged by philologists and colonial administrators, repackaged as modern geopolitical analysis. The experts just traded their colonial pith helmets for modern think tank suits.
Modern Orientalists, or area experts as they often prefer to be called today, frequently act as the special agents of Western power. They advise governments, translating the old dogmas into modern policy jargon.
But the core belief remains the same.
Yes. The belief that the Orient is eternal, uniform, and incapable of defining itself, and therefore, a highly generalized vocabulary for describing it from a Western standpoint is both inevitable and objective.
So what does this all mean? We started today by talking about a map and the comforting idea that the lines drawn on it are just objective reflections of reality.
And we've seen today that Orientalism isn't just a genre of romantic art or an isolated field of linguistic study.
Not at all. It is a deeply interconnected three-part system: academic, imaginative, and institutional. It's rooted in the late 18th century, sparked by events like Napoleon's massive scientific invasion of Egypt, which literally turned the East into a laboratory for Western categorization.
It uses Foucault's concept of discourse, like a massive cultural algorithm, to establish a regime of truth where only certain things can even be thought or said about the East.
And it relies on Gramsci's cultural hegemony to manufacture consent, ensuring that everyone from the sincere novelist Flaubert writing in Paris to the imperial administrator Lord Cromer ruling in Egypt operates on the exact same common-sense assumptions about Western superiority.
This system of thought justifies and maintains Western domination, constantly turning the Orient into a textualized, manageable object rather than a living, breathing reality of complex human beings.
So why does this matter to you, listening right now? It means that when you read a news article, watch a film, or read a history book about a foreign culture, you must actively ask yourself some hard questions.
Who wrote the vocabulary being used?
Exactly. Are you getting raw, objective facts, or are you receiving a heavily curated, historically loaded discourse?
It demands an active, critical engagement with the sources of our knowledge.
And it leaves us with a lingering, profound question to consider as you go about your day.
If our entire foundational vocabulary for describing the East was built on a structure designed for domination and control, is it ever possible to truly, objectively know another culture?
Or does the very act of trying to categorize and study another society automatically trap us in a new form of cultural hegemony? Think about whether the language you use to describe the world is a window you look through, or if it is actually just a mirror, reflecting your own culture's assumptions and power back at you.
A window or a mirror? That is the ultimate question.
It really is. It completely changes how I will ever look at that map of the world. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the map makers, and we will catch you next time.